Hi class, this is Dr. Kaufman and we are here at week 4 of CNL-500 Theories in Counseling, and we're talking about behavior-oriented counseling theories this week. So for chapter 8 and 9 of the textbook, we'll be covering behavior theory as it applies to mental health counseling and rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, as a theory of counseling. So this video lecture here is going to focus on the behavioral psychology and how counselors can use this in clinical settings with our clients. Let's go ahead and get started with the lecture. Now on this introductory slide, we have an image here of B.F. Skinner. He's at a table with some scientific apparatus, and that apparatus is a box. You'll see there's a rat inside the box, and you'll see that he's operating a wheel that is delivering food through a pipe that goes into a little box that's an offshoot box to the larger box that the rat is living in. And so the rat has done something favorable and has earned the delivery of food, which is the reward or the positive reinforcement mechanism of the box. The Skinner box, which is named after B.F. Skinner, is a scientific experiment that explains how reward shapes behavior and also how punishment shapes behavior. So behavioral theory has basically the concept that things that go positively for us, our brain recognizes that and is more likely to repeat the behavior that led to that reward. And things that do not go favorably for us, the brain is going to hold on to that. It's going to remember our input for that situation, and it is less likely to repeat a behavior that leads to an undesired outcome. And that's really the crux of behaviorism. And that's something that as counselors, it could behoove us to remember with our clients is, I ask myself all the time, how did my clients become the kind of person that they are sitting in front of me today? And I think the answer to that question often is their environment has led them to experience rewards for certain kinds of behavior, even if the behavior is one that I view as a counselor as being a bad one. They've been rewarded for it, and so they continue to display that behavior. They continue to behave in that way in those settings, in those environments. And so they perceive that they're being reinforced by their system. Whereas as a counselor, I'm looking at things like self-sabotage, dysfunctional motivation, maybe poor social interaction, communication habits. And I'm trying to change those processes so that they can experience the goal that they are trying to convince me they would prefer to have in their life circumstance. Now, for counselors, the target is that we would change their behavior. We want to focus not on what's in their mind, not what's in their emotions. We just want to look at them like, what behaviors can I observe right now? When I'm going into a behavioral mode as a counselor, I use an example with my clients of, if I'm a camera that can magically follow you around during your day, I can't talk to you, I can't read your mind, I can't understand your emotions, except for the ones that you show through your behavior. What would I see? All that matters is what I see. Are you exhibiting the behaviors that lead to the goal that you're telling me that you have? And so that's where the buck stops in behavioral therapy. We're not focused on the past, except for in so much as the past has shaped the present behavior. We're not worried about connections with object relations. We're not worried about parent-child dynamics. We're not worried about anything except for what has been reinforced that leads the client to be the way we are experiencing them in the present moment. It's important to understand 3 big topics before we move forward. Classical conditioning. At this point, you should read in the textbook and make sure you are aware of some of the big behavioral experiments throughout the development of psychology. So Ivan Pavlov, conditioning the dog to respond to the tone of a bell to expect food, and then salivating when that bell rings, even when food isn't present, because the bell, the ding, 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 and delivering the food have been paired together in the mind of the canine and his behavior. And so he salivates uncontrollably because the bell tone has been heard. We also look at John Watson, and we have the little Albert experiment. So this is sort of like clang. You make a loud, metallic, undesired sound behind an infant when they're approaching something fluffy and nurturing and calming, like a stuffed animal. But the discomfort that comes from the unexpected clang, that jolt, that jump scare, causes the child, the young infant mind, to be afraid of the bear. It actually thinks the bear caused it because they were approaching that fluffy animal in a way that the sound got paired with the thing that should have been a positive stimulus, but now the brain has recorded it as a negative experience. We also have social learning. So Albert Bandura, the Bobo doll, and the sort of vicious beating on that doll, where if a kid observes another kid beating on the doll violently, they will repeat the behavior because they will learn that the Bobo doll deserves vicious, violent interaction. And we also have Thorndike and the law of effect. The law of effect is what I said in the previous slide. We are more likely to repeat things that go positively for us, and we are less likely to repeat things that go poorly for us. So according to Thorndike, we should look at this class, and if you have gotten a low grade on one of your papers, then in theory you would get more resources, read the textbook more thoroughly, maybe write more and elaborate and be more comprehensive, and then you'll earn a better score. And then when you earn that better score, you're more likely to do your paper exactly the same way next time. So as the universe in that equation, my role is to give you a grade that reflects the amount of effort you're putting into your paper. Because if I give you a really high A for a paper that you really didn't know your stuff, you didn't prepare, and you didn't have the right resources, then you've actually learned I don't need to apply myself to this class, which is the opposite of what your future clients need you to do. They need you to lock in and learn these ideas. And so my role as the instructor of the course, if we're going with operant classical conditioning, is that you get a grade that pushes you to really know your stuff, so your future clients can depend on you to be the kind of counselor that they're paying for, that their insurance is reimbursing you for, and that they need you to be in order for their positive change to come into their lives. So it's really interesting when you flip what we're doing as students and as the instructor of the course and look at it through the lens of behavioral psychology. I could talk about that all day, quite honestly. Another thing that we need to understand about behaviorism, it is really not worried about existential meaningfulness. It's not worried about your feelings. It is going to coldly and honestly and from the results explain the truth in the reality. And so here's a quote from Hans Eysenck that science, only one thing matters, and that is the facts. So they're not worried about anything else except what is verifiable by the observation of what's happening on this earth. And then another thing to remember is that if the symptom disappears, then we must have found the behavior that is important to overcome that symptom, and so the neurosis is gone. So it's not about anything inside here. It's not about your feelings. It's not about how uncomfortable that solution feels. It's just, we found the solution, keep doing that. If you don't do that, then of course you're going to continue experiencing consequences and you will have the neurosis. So the promise of behavioral theory is that when you find the solution, you have found the way to overcome the problem, and it's up to you to continue doing that. And there's some credence to that, I think. Now here's one last quote. Psychotherapy is the prostitution of friendship. Now, if you remember back to my week 1 video about the nature of theory, I had talked about how people do not go to counseling if they can overcome the problem themselves. They do not come to therapy if they have a really good friend who's wise and can lead them into a feeling of support or into a solution. So they go through several levels of trying to solve their problems themselves until they decide, I'm going to spend an hour every week going to psychotherapy. And so, in a way, we're getting paid to be that person who can guide them towards a solution. So, Hans Eysenck is not exactly wrong here with this quote. Psychotherapy very well may be the prostitution of friendship. So just remember that we are there to be a person that people need in their life because they don't have someone else who can be that for them. To find a solution, to lend some empathy and some support, to problem solve, just to acknowledge feelings with. We are that. And if you don't have a good friend who's capable of putting their own ego to the side and listening in that way, then your counselor may be the only person in your life that can do that. So although this is a little bold as a quote, and although it does tie in with behavioral theory, it's not as ridiculous as it looks at face value. Eysenck is right. We are delivering a professional service that takes the place of what friends could do. And I think it's important to stay humble and remember what we can be for our clients if we choose to be the right mind, the right kind of person, to be who they need us to be in that moment. It's not about us. It's about them and what they have and what they don't have in that moment when they decide to turn to counseling for help. Now, the philosophy of behaviorism, I've already explained a little bit of this, and of course, please read the textbook. But there's a neutral view of human nature. We're neither good things, we're not bad things either. We are the product of our conditioning from our environment. We are the product of what has been rewarded and what has been punished. There's also radical behaviorism, and that's that the environment is the sole determinant of behavior, which means it's not about your genetics at all. If you've become a grad school professor like I am, it's because you were given the opportunity to excel at grad school. Somehow you decided you love writing and researching and you love instructing people. If you are a criminal, it's because you've grown up in an environment where following the rules was not prioritized. It's because you weren't passed down values from the influential people in your life, and you got away with several crimes to the point where you learned that that's a nice shortcut for getting your needs met, until eventually you got caught by the legal system. And we could go on and on. If you're a teacher, you might have been, like elementary school teacher or a librarian, or if you're a grocery store worker, then you have been led down a path to where those kinds of ways of helping people and delivering a service to people have been shown to be a good use of your time. And so you've applied to be those things, and you've practiced being those things, and you've reported to work, and you've mentally transformed into being those things. And so no matter whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, a comfortable thing or an unfortunate thing, the radical behaviorist approach is that your environment has allowed you to become that through the things that have worked well for you in your past, in your own life experience. Now let's look at these two pictures here. The behaviorist model has a stimulus response expectation. So let's look at this. The stimulus right now is you're watching a video lecture during your online class. The response is you are listening and you are learning about this theory, and you will carry this knowledge into the rest of the week of this course. And hopefully you're more excited by behavioral theory after watching the video. Now, if you're not excited by behavioral theory, then the stimulus is still the video, and then your natural response is, oh, this theory is not for me, I don't want to do it. And now you're not going to read up on it, you're not going to practice it, you're going to select other theories that maybe line up better for you. And that's okay too. Now let's look at the chart on the right, and remember Pavlov's dog that I described. The positive reinforcement is that food is given to the dog, and then the dog will eat it. When the bell is rung, we have an unconditioned stimulus with the conditioned stimulus. So the conditioned stimulus is the new thing, the bell. The unconditioned stimulus is the one the dog likes naturally, the food. So we give them both to the dog at the same time, and it creates a new behavior. The dog will come and be excited for food when he hears the tone of the bell, which is the conditioned stimulus. So the unconditioned response is you see food, you get excited for food. The conditioned response is you hear the bell, you get excited for food. So we have now added a new behavior to the dog's life through classical conditioning. Now, the bell, there is no natural response of a dog to a bell, the sound, the ding, ding, ding. But by doing something consistently, the dog is learning that that bell means something. So it is a conditioned stimulus with a conditioned response. Now, let's talk about negative reinforcement. Let's say that we have an animal like a rat in a Skinner box, and we electrify the floor so that it will zap their feet every 3 seconds. But we have a button on the wall. If you push the button, then the shocks will stop for 5 minutes. Eventually, that rat will learn that by pushing the button, we remove something that doesn't feel good to them. That is negative reinforcement. When you save someone from something that is undesired, unhealthy, uncomfortable for a period of time for a behavior that you're trying to get them to learn. So, for example, if you turn in your assignments and they're written well with good support and every section is detailed and comprehensive, then you will not fail my class, which is actually a negative reinforcement because you may be afraid of failing the class. The idea of getting a C or lower on the class is uncomfortable for you, but by doing good work, I'm removing the threat of you failing the class, which makes you feel more comfortable continuing with week 4, week 5, 6, 7, 8. And so you will get a better grade and you'll have a more comfortable experience of working with me in the course. Now, also, you could look at that as positive reinforcement if you look just at one assignment. So you're writing your paper on behavioral psychology this week. So if you write it well, I will give you a high score using the rubric. The rubric will match up with the kinds of things you've written in your paper, and you'll get an A. So that A is a positive reinforcement. You did good work, you received a good grade. So positive reinforcement is do good work, get a good grade. Negative reinforcement is do good work, do not fail the class. Now, punishment is a little bit different. The late policy is a punishment. So it's important to turn your work in on time. That's also behavioral psychology. So if you turn in your paper late, you lose 10% for every day that it's late. That is a punishment. That is an extra negative, unwanted thing that happens to you for failing to fulfill the behavioral objective. Okay, so that's how punishment works. A lot of people think negative reinforcement and punishment are the same thing, and they actually are not. So it's important to remember that. All right, next slide. Here's another example of Pavlov's dog in a sort of graphic display. And we've talked about the stimulus response model and the reinforcement. And if you are confused about this, I recommend pausing this slide, taking notes on the image, and maybe re-listening to what I discussed on the previous slide because I have explained this. It's about stimulus and response. And then there's unconditioned stimulus, which is something that the creature has a natural reaction to, and the unconditioned response, which is the natural reaction. Then you have the conditioned stimulus, which is I have to learn what this thing means, and then there's the conditioned response. This is the response I have to the thing I just learned about. And then, of course, there's operant conditioning. This worked well for me, I'll continue it. This did not work well for me, I will discontinue it. We also learn from the people around us. That's called observational learning. And I have a slide that really explains that well coming up here. Now, here's another diagram. Now, I've talked a few times in this video about unconditioned and conditioned stimuluses and responses. There's a new one here, which is a neutral stimulus. That is something that the creature organism has no reaction to in their natural state, like the bell. The dog doesn't know what that bell means. They aren't programmed in their instincts and their urges to understand that bell. But when we put the bell with the food, we are teaching the dog that that bell means food is coming, which causes a conditioned response. All right. Now here's another example of operant conditioning with our mouse and a lever. So if we are rewarding the mouse by pulling the lever, then they will continue to pull it. If we shock them when they touch the lever, they will stay away from the lever. We're teaching them that is off limits. And a lot of times these programmings are there because in the past, we would need them in order to survive. So think about our primal instincts and shortly after caveman times. We banded together, we would go in tribes, and we would do things throughout the night to survive our predators. We would learn what works because we woke up and we're not dead. And then unfortunately, if you're dead, you don't have to worry about conditioning because your biological time has concluded. And so the idea is if you're alive, you're doing things right and you need to continue doing them that way. We've become a little bit more complex because our society has greater levels of security and structure than in those primal times. But this is where the thought process and the understanding really comes from that Skinner is trying to tap into and use to help people live their best life, their most satisfying and consistent life. Now let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. I'm going to talk here about pay schedules in order to explain how schedules of reinforcement work. If you have an hourly job that gets paid every 2 weeks, then the number of hours you work determines the amount of pay, and the pay is delivered to you on the same part of the calendar, but every 2 weeks. And so that would be a fixed ratio because you know exactly when you're going to be paid every 14 days. Now, sometimes the amount might change, but the reward is always there every 14 days. Now, let's say that you have a counseling job. I've actually had a counseling job that had a variable ratio. And so what that means is you would get paid out every certain number of counseling services. And so if you have a week where you do 10 services, you'll get paid at the end of that week. If it takes you a week and a half to do those 10 counseling services, then you'll get paid the following week. So it's whenever you're able to finish a week with an increment of 10. It's a weird way to pay people, but sometimes you do end up in this field in a situation where there is a variable ratio. And so sometimes you might have a week where you get paid for 20, and on that Friday you get paid for 20 sessions. So the amount of pay actually changes too. Now let's talk about the variable interval. Sometimes the way that you get reinforced changes based on what's going on elsewhere that has nothing to do with you. So getting your grade in this class, my goal is to deliver your grade before the end of the following week. However, when I'm teaching 9 classes, and sometimes I have 1 or 2 that ended the previous week, I have to submit the grades out of order. So normally I try to go from the latest class, the one that's closest to the end, and work my way backwards. But sometimes things happen, such as taking time to record videos, such as meetings, such as committees that I'm on for Grand Canyon University. And sometimes you may get your grade a couple days before you thought you would, and sometimes you'll get your grade back a couple days after you thought you would. That's a variable interval because the interval changes. It's about time. And then the fixed interval would be if you got your grade every single Tuesday, right? There is a way that I could structure my class so that certain classes always get them on Friday, certain classes always get them on Monday. I don't choose to do that because it's really hard to keep track of. And I have a chart here that explains fixed and variable intervals and ratios. And so this is something where if you want to write down and start thinking about how schedules of reinforcement maybe change the way that the subject thinks about what is shaping their behavior, then this is what the counselor needs to understand. So if I praise the client when they come into the session and say, I made some progress toward my goal, you're either using a fixed ratio or a variable ratio because every time they do something right, you're telling them, good job. You could also do counseling bucks, little rectangular strips of paper that count as dollars, and maybe you have a gift store, like they can get a candy bar from you or a little Happy Meal toy if you're working with children. Some counselors do a reinforcement system during their therapy so that the child can actually do things. When they share an insight, they can earn these bucks and turn them in for a reward that they get to choose at the end of the session, whether it's a little pack of Skittles or a little, superhero from, someplace where you get tiny toys that are easy to give away. So you can be really creative with this as a counselor and use it to make the psychology of your clients actually more effectively part of the counseling process. It's all about, where do your creative limits rest? And is this a kind of counseling that you're ready to buy into and utilize with your live clients? Now, on the topic of observational learning, as a family therapist, I see this all the time. Look at this picture. What are you seeing? You're seeing a child who is going to be the spitting image of their dad. Now, hopefully they're playing some game together and this is actually collaborative. But what I suspect is the dad is sitting on the bench, not paying attention to their kid, and the kid is sitting on the bench, not paying attention to their dad. I have observed in the last decade of my career, especially since smartphones have become bigger and bigger, that kids are being raised by their iPads, their tablets, whatever devices their parents have chosen to give them, that it gives the parents a mental timeout from having to engage their child. And as a result, parents have less stamina for parenting, which from a behavioral perspective is really disappointing as a marriage and family counselor who works with kids all the time. And even in the school system, kids all the time have ADHD, but they've never been taught by a parent who understands focusing your attention, and they've never been told that you're 6 years old, it's okay to have energy. There's not even an emphasis on really doing recess or PE in a way that lets that energy out. My son doesn't have PE every single day. He doesn't have ADHD either, but he probably could if I didn't spend so much time at home trying to help him understand how his behavior works and what is developmentally appropriate. We are losing these things as a value in our society, and it's because of pictures like this. I once did a play therapy session with a 6-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother, and it was a collaborative play exercise where they were supposed to build a house with some foam blocks together and put the figures in the house to display what it's like at home, and have different heroes or monsters or little princesses represent the people in their family doing the things they do. And the mom was sitting on the couch observing, and I would turn to her and give her a chance to model some positive guidance towards her own children. The problem is, I was on the floor sitting with the kids doing the activity, with the mom, I'm assuming, observing the session. And I turned around 3 different times during that 30-minute activity to prompt the mom to model some parenting behavior towards her kids and take control of the role of guiding her kids during the session. And all 3 times, she needed me to halt and clarify for a minute or longer about where we're at, because she's not paying attention at all. She was texting like a madman, madwoman, I guess. She was just texting someone the entire session. And I prompted her that smartphones do not belong outside your pocket or your purse. And because she's the adult, I guess she's smarter than me. I'm just the counselor. She chose not to listen to those prompts. She just kept ignoring me as the counselor, guiding her into her parenting role, and hence ignoring her children, because her screen was more important than the therapy goals in that moment. And so, as the model of appropriate behavior to her kids, what did that 6-year-old girl and 4-year-old boy learn from her? I don't have to listen to the counselor because my phone is more interesting. And I know that's not a message the mom was deliberately trying to send. But observational learning doesn't care what message you meant to send. All that matters is what message your behavior sent. That's all you're accountable for. That's all you're expected to be in command of. And so if you're not doing the things that show that you are an adjusted, well-functioning human being, then how are the people looking up to you supposed to be any different? And that is why iPad babysitting is a bad idea. And as a counselor, you'll notice it, I promise. It's not going anywhere. Now, as far as the development of the individual, the past is only a way for us to understand what has been reinforced. So when that 6-year-old girl gets a detention in high school because she won't put her phone away during class, it's because from the age of 6, Even during therapy appointments, her mom has been teaching her that the phone takes priority. It's not going to make sense when some other adult says, hey, put your phone away, because that's not what we do in this family. That is what has been reinforced from her own observations of the adults that matter the most, the parents. And so the role of the counselor is to try and praise when you leave your phone away and you stay on task. Try to reward it. Try to be the person, the voice of reason who talks about being on task, and give the child an opportunity to talk about how easy it was to perform at a high level when you are on task. But it's a tall order because the environment that they are stuck in many more hours of the day. They only get 1 hour with you every week, basically, and 100 hours in different environments that do not share the same values and the same behavioral objectives that you do. So for all of you who are going to be counselors, it's great you want to be in the field. And on the topic of how humans develop behaviorally in the world where we're so technologically focused and distracted, I say to you, good luck. But, I'm in the trenches with you. So someday we will share in that misery together. Now, here's John Watson giving us one of the most famous behavioral psychology quotes of all time. And I don't like reading entire quotes in my lectures, but I'm going to do it for this one. In the voice of John Watson, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggar man and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. I am going beyond my facts and I admit it, but so have the advocates to the contrary, and they have been doing it for many thousands of years. What he's saying is, I don't care who you are, where you're from. I'm not going to go into lyrics of any pop songs right now, but I can shape you by just reinforcing your behavior, rewarding you when you do certain things, punishing you when you do others. I can turn you into whatever I want if I control the world and I have one-on-one FaceTime with you. I can turn you into a doctor and I can turn you into a thief because I know how to reinforce the mind. And the mind and its lessons that it's learned through its conditioning are all that really matters. So again, remember how this works as the counselor. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, social learning. What are you showing the client that matters in your behavior and the things you worry about when you talk to them? What are you reinforcing in them? When do you praise them? When do you maybe challenge them? When do you say that there is some disappointment in the counseling process? How do you reward their successes that they report in session? How do you explore their disappointments that they bring to you in session? These are all moments where you as a counselor are conditioning them to understand themselves at a deeper level. You are guiding them towards being healthy or being dysfunctional. Just like Watson is saying he could steer them towards being a lawyer or an artist or being a beggar man and a thief. Now, assessment focuses on what the client does. It's only about behavior, what's been reinforced, what's been shaped. It is formal and it is looking only at things that can be observed. You don't diagnose mental health concepts like depression. You only identify behaviors that when you put them all together, maybe other-minded counselors might say this is major depressive disorder. But the behaviorist is only looking at the behaviors involved in depression. Staying in bed, not getting up, not eating healthy, not exercising, not getting dressed, not paying attention to hygiene, not seeking out sexual activities or other kinds of things that are enjoyable stimuli, not seeking out things that you previously have found enjoyable, not reaching out to people, choosing to isolate yourself. These are all behaviors. If we stop the behaviors, the neuroses stop. Remember that quote. That's all that matters. It's not about how it feels. It's not about how easy it is. It's just about stopping the undesired behavior and electing to shape and condition the desired behavior to the point where operant conditioning kicks in and the person continues to exhibit that behavior. And because of that, the client is really an experiment. And the counseling relationship is not the same at all. I am there to manipulate the variables, the unconditioned stimulus, the conditioned stimulus, to get you to exhibit a new conditioned response that is the behavior you're hoping for when you came into counseling and said, I want to fix this about myself. It's not about how we feel about each other. Now, it is collaborative. I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to be part of the new conditioned system. I'm going to tell you when things are working and when they're not. That feedback is supposed to condition what you're going to do. So we are working together. You are my subject in a new psycho-emotional Skinner box. The goals are to reduce things that sabotage yourself. So if I'm working with a college student and they're failing some tests, I want to eliminate the behaviors that lead to failing tests. I want to cut down on partying the night before tests without studying. I want to increase the amount of studying and preparation and being aware of the subject matter when you go into that classroom to take a test. And so I will prescribe the behavior. I will tell you the solution, and you need to take it or leave it. Hopefully, if you are a functional human being, you will accept that feedback and you will follow the prescribed behavior. And I know, because all that matters is behaviorism, that if you follow the feedback and my feedback is sound and accurate, you will experience the desired outcome. And so let's look at assessment. Functional analysis occurs at 3 levels: the direct observation of the counselor, how you collect that information, and then how you explain the consequences and the preceding behaviors, the antecedents. And so the client needs to understand the outcome of this functional assessment so that they can use that feedback and receive the desired outcome. Now, if they tell you that this is not going to work, that there's something wrong in the assessment, we need to change it because I'm a little different than the way you're perceiving me, then remember this: the client is never wrong. The counselor should adjust the functional assessment to account for all the variables, including the ones that the client may be imagining. If they imagine it, it's part of their world, and they are allowed to have their world because their world is shaping their behavior. So you need to understand their world, even the imagined parts, and you need to create a functional analysis that understands their antecedents correctly and understands their consequences correctly so that we can modify the variables and they can get the desired outcome. So it's still an experiment. You create a contract with the client that you will do this week, you will do this by Sunday, you will do this exactly before your exam, you will take the exam, you will do this afterwards. And then the client needs to follow that contract, but the client can also say, what about this? And then you need to modify the contract before it gets locked in so that it matches the perception of the client in their own environment. Now, look here. This is a long list of therapeutic techniques. And if you're interested in any of these, I would encourage you to look up journal articles about them. Things like relaxation training, exposure therapy, shaping, punishment, extinction. All of these things are terminology and concepts that a behavioral counselor needs to have in their repertoire. You have to be able to guide the client through these activities depending on what their problem is. So if you have a panic attack or generalized anxiety, you may practice relaxation training with the client during your session. You might need to have a deep breathing video or deep breathing scripted MP3 that you can play during the session. Do it together and then do some deprocessing afterwards to review what it felt like to do it and plan out when is an appropriate time to add that to your life situation, to your routine of the day. You could also do systematic desensitization. So if you're afraid of going outside your door, if you have agoraphobia, if you don't like social situations or doing class presentations, you can practice doing a class presentation during the therapy session with just an audience of one, the counselor. And you can talk about the rise, the ebb and the flow of the anxiety while you're on stage delivering these concepts. And you can use the therapy time as an opportunity to practice. You could even encourage the client to bring in some friends and do a release of information for them to attend that session and practice doing that presentation with friends sitting next to you. So you've actually increased the audience and you're creating a desensitization. They're getting more comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And that's just some examples. With kids, you can use a lot of these too. You can do timeouts and shaping, and you can build them towards the behavior you'd like them to exhibit in the classroom. Give them worksheets and give them feedback on when it looks like they're on task and when it looked like they were not. So review it at the end and give them praise if they are on task and completing it, and then maybe get a release of information to send an email to the teacher and give them an update and say, this is what I'm working with the client on. Here's the new condition stimulus and the condition response. So if you give them some individualized attention to prompt them into the activity, I'm training them in therapy to stay focused a little bit better when the teacher says a couple different things directly to them. And so that's how behavioral therapy, releases of information, and collaborative processes from therapy can help all the different influential adults in a child's life to lead to the change in behavior that everyone wants to see happen for that child client. Now, this theory is viewed as cold, mechanical, scientific, only worried about data, the numbers, the observable. And so because of that, some cultures may not buy into it very well, and others may buy into it wonderfully. They may look at it like all the psycho-emotional stuff that we have from Western society, Americanized society, is a waste of understanding, that we don't really need it, that it's just about execution and goals and motivations and how you show those in your behavior and your preparation for a situation. Now, it is the most scientific approach. This is what science is all about. Behavior, observation, things that you can condition and shape in a living organism. And so it has great numbers in research when you're looking at behavioral issues, like, say, the list of depression symptoms that I listed earlier in the video. So remember that too. It's a very good theory for some things, and it does leave things to be wanted in others, like the emotions of a person and things of that nature. But that's why we're going to talk about theories of counseling that do integrate behaviorism with the thought processes and emotions of people moving into the next week and a half or so. Now, numerous studies support it. Outcome literature says that behavioral theory is wonderful because it's designed for research to favor it. It's all measurable. That's all that it is. And so, of course, scientific experiments are going to find those observable phenomenon and say, we found it easily. It works consistently. And so some people don't feel like it's really an approach to counseling, that it is a scientific approach. But because we worry about behavior so much as mental health counselors, it is important to understand these principles, because even if you do more than behavioral psychology in your treatment sessions, if you understand these concepts, sometimes it can be the difference maker with certain kinds of problems. So don't dismiss this. Figure out how these concepts fit into the kind of counselor you are trying to grow into being. Now, the summary of this theory is the following 4 steps. Behavioral theory emphasizes learned nature of behaviors. The techniques are effective. Behaviors and their environments are way more important than personal determinants like genetics or, thought processes and emotions. And it's applicable to a range of clients. So you can shape behaviors, move forward, and have a beneficial response to people doing counseling with you if you use behavioral theory. So just remember, antecedent, behavior, consequence, those are the ABCs of behavioral theory. What did you do to get ready for the exam? Did you attend lectures and study hard? And if you did, you will likely achieve a good grade. Just like in my example about 20 minutes ago. This has been the longest lecture so far in the class. Thank you for hanging in and covering this chapter with me. And the next video we do is going to cover chapter 9, which is rational emotive behavior therapy and the work of Albert Ellis. So thank you for hanging in, watching the video. I hope this helps you prepare for your paper this week if you're choosing to do behavioral theory. And if not, just pay attention to the rest of the week. We'll get the REBT video up and running as soon as I'm able to record it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.